We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles, Director of Partnerships here at Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Doug Kessler. He is the Creative Director and Co-founder of Velocity Partners. Doug, how are you doing today, sir?
Good. How are you, Logan?
I am doing fantastic. I am really excited to chat with you. Your agency has been highly awarded, obviously doing some great things. So I know that you're going to have some great knowledge to share with listeners, especially on this topic of naming or renaming your B2B brand. I think it's an area that there are some common pitfalls that we're going to speak to today. Before we get into that, Doug, though, I would love for you to share with listeners a little bit about yourself and what you and the team at Velocity Partners are up to these days.
Okay, thanks. So my name's Doug Kessler. Yes, I started my career in New York. I'm a Yank, live in London now, though. Started out in kind of traditional Madman, Madison Avenue type advertising, drifted into the backwaters of B2B, which turned out to be where I belonged and is no longer a backwater. Luckily, it's a fun place to be. Started Velocity along with Stan Woods, my partner, a number of years ago, and we are a B2B tech company, kind of known for our content marketing. We do actually brand and strategy. We do content marketing. We do performance marketing, which is really the analytics and data side of things. And that all kind of surrounds what we call a galvanizing idea. So all of those kind of practices are around, okay, first we got to find a big idea or a big story for this company. We specialize in tech companies. And so simplifying tricky, complex things is what we're all about.
I love it. And I love your comment there of drifting into the backwaters.
Yeah.
I'm with you. B2B marketing is a great space to be right now and a ton of fun. So I'm glad we both drifted in from different angles for sure. So Doug, before we get into some do's and don'ts, some practical ways to think about things as you're looking at naming a new company or going through a renaming process, I think it's best to first clear the air and talk a little bit about what you and I discussed offline a few minutes ago of remembering that a name isn't everything and thinking about what a name isn't going to do first, right?
Yeah, I think it really is important because I think people go in, you name a company or a brand so infrequently that you kind of think it's a defining moment and it's going to make or break your company and it's super important. And of course it is, but you have to think there really aren't great names. There are great companies. And those names then stand for that and over time carry all of the associations of that wonderful company. There are some terrible names, some really crappy ones. But I mean, it's the one time in marketing where aiming for great isn't really the point. It's aiming for a name that will be a container that will fit what you do, or it'll be a shirt that you wear and it fits, and that you can over time fill it with all the values and good messages that you want and won't fight you as you do that. So it's a weird example in marketing where aiming too high makes it more likely that you flop because the name that just kills it for you is probably alienating for someone else. And what you want is a working name you can over time turn into a great name.
I think that's a great way to think about it. Aiming for great can almost stand in your way. A lot of people have asked about the generation of the name of our agency of Sweetfish Media, and I think it's fun and funny that it actually comes in a roundabout way through our founder's love of the Swedish fish candy, and it just seemed to hey, this will work. And since then, folks have asked us about it and those sorts of things, and almost expecting this, amazing story, but we found something that was catchy enough and, fit, that worked well enough, and it has worked for us for a number of years now. So anyhow, just aside, and I know that what you're saying is true, as I've seen it with our own brand. So Doug, even though we have that in mind, that the name isn't everything, it's not going to drive sales, it's not going to do our product marketing for us, but there are still some components to think about in what makes for a good B2B company name. You guys had a blog post where you unpacked some of this, and maybe it's just ground rules, but I thought there were some good lessons there that I'd love for you to unpack for listeners.
So for a recent one that we did with a company, we wanted to start with some non-negotiable. So what are the criteria of a good name for this company? And we came up with 5 that were really our starters. They were just things that we knew had to pass these tests, and that'll change for different companies. But for this company, it was things like must be easily pronounced when read. You don't want to have to train the whole world how to say a name. Now, there are plenty of successful companies that didn't pass that test in the beginning, like Eloqua and Marketo. Both get mispronounced even now, but at the beginning all the time, Eloqua, Marketo, and now they're, people know them now and they're fine. But there was a period where everyone had to, teach the world how to say it. Mm-hmm. So for the company I'm talking about, they wanted something easily pronounced when read, and that was one of them. And I think a lot of companies would do well to do that just to save themselves a headache. The other similar one is like must be easily spelled when heard. So it's the reverse process there. You hear it first, would you spell it right? Because again, you don't want to spend all your time going, it's like Quest, but with a W and 2 T's, or it's, Elvis, but with 3 S's, it's a pain in the ass. You don't necessarily want to constantly be doing that. So for this company, they wanted it easily spelled when heard. For any company, I think it's really important, this criteria I'd put on anyone's list, which is must not imply the wrong things. Notice I didn't say must imply what you do. It's actually a lower bar. It shouldn't mislead. It shouldn't imply things that are not right and would lead someone down the wrong path. And so that's an important one. For this company, they wanted to have an available .com without having to put, a tweak in the main name, like, HQ or something to make it stand out and be unique. So they wanted the .com, and that was important. Plenty of good names don't, and company names are fine with a .ai or a .io for tech now. But for this company, wanting that and knowing that that's important to you up front will change your search quite a bit. If you can't get the .com, that name dies, right? So that was one. And then, of course, this should be on anyone's list too. Avoid vendor names that are in your space. But obviously that's obvious to everybody. But it's funny how far you can get in a naming exercise, and then realize, it's too close to somebody pretty close to our space, and that's so you want to start ruling that out right up front too. So those are kind of a short list of things that are almost like the non-negotiable to filter out names as you go forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And better to do them early on as opposed to last and final check. Okay, guys, let's make sure there's no, existing competitors or vendors, adjacent to our industry late in the process.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So I think one of the other challenges for folks, Doug, is to remove subjectivity from this process because, as you play with names, there's definitely an emotional response and those sorts of things. So what guidance can you give to listeners that might be going through this process sometime soon to set themselves up for success in that way?
Yeah, really, really important one. So a name is such a subjective thing. And, everybody's got strong opinions about it. I mean, so like if each person has their own little filter screen and then you put 2 people and that screen gets fine, or 3, 4, 5, the more people you add, the fewer names are going to get through. And the ones who do, the ones that do get through that kind of process, the super subjective filtering process, tend to be the least offensive as opposed to the strongest names. They're often compromises. So what you want to do is get people thinking about the criteria different dimensions of a name and try to get people aligned early on. Like we will show a client these spectrums, and they're almost like sliders. One is the evocative to descriptive scale that I told you about. It's like you show people, okay, here's some evocative names like Adobe or Xerox. And at the other end, super descriptive names, Salesforce, demand base, where do you guys want to be on this? And ask them to almost put a dot on the spectrum. And if 2, 3, 4 of your stakeholders have dots totally different places on the spectrum, well, you better talk about that before you start throwing names at people, because the names are just going to all die. We call it kind of clay pigeon shooting. You throw one up, it dies. Someone's going to kill it. So you try to get people to agree on a zone. It's not the exact spot on each scale, a zone. So evocative descriptive might be one, emotional to rational scientific. So Yahoo is emotional, IBM is super rational, or Informatica or content science, these kind of names. Get that up front. Get people to say, oh, I want to be toward this end or that end. Now, it's okay if people are comfortable with the whole spectrum, but you should know it going in. We often will do one that's the playful to the enterprisey end of the thing. Like playful end is a name like Vazula or Sumo or something. And the enterprise is ADP and Axiom and those kind of names. And you just want to know for your key stakeholders, the hopefully small team that's going to be deciding on this name, are you thinking in the same area before the list starts counting? And for us, the time and work you spend up front in that aligning people, removing subjectivity is really, really valuable, because you can kill a lot of time throwing a whole bunch of names through a process, and they just keep dying because you haven't aligned first.
Yeah, I love that analogy of clay pigeon shooting. When you start the process with and you hand everybody a shotgun, then you're just asking for bits and pieces to be laying on the ground everywhere when you come out of that meeting, right?
It is true, and especially with names, and people can have a very strong first reaction to a name. They can just hate it for whatever reason. It reminds me of my cousin's second grade teacher who hit him. It's like, well, yeah, it does, but is that fatal or just a really quick association you've just had, And when you think about it, there's some names out there that would never have passed anyone's test. Like one of our clients is Slack. Slack is a name. I love the name. I think it's a great name, but it would never have passed the process most people go through, because it means something that's kind of limp and lax, and something you want to get out of companies is Slack. And here they are, about collaboration, and they want to bring it into companies, and yet it survived this killer objection, which it means something that's kind of almost the opposite, and yet it is a very, very good, short, snappy name that somehow has a whole lot of mojo in it. And so when you realize that some names that easily would have died for what look like good reasons can actually be excellent names. And that people should kind of relax about their first visceral reaction to a new word that they hear or a new idea.
Yeah. And if you give them some framework to understand and help people understand where they're coming from, because oftentimes they might not have thought, well, I want more evocative versus descriptive, but they didn't even have that framework in their mind going in. So not only are you dealing with different perspectives, but you're dealing with people who aren't thinking critically about their perspective. Not to say that they're not smart people, but I'm glad that, the name Slack came through. I'm staring at Slack on my screen right now as one of the tabs open, and it's become a verb. I'm going to Slack. I'm going to Slack a message to you.
Also, you think of some what are on paper terrible names that did no damage to their owners. Like I always think the Beatles. Beatles with an A. What a terrible, cheesy name. But we don't even think about that. They've had such an incredible career. They reinvented pop music. They, unbelievable. So you get right past it onto it. So that tells people relax a little bit. Get a good name you like and can live with, and soon you're going to love it because you're going to love the company that it stands for.
Right. I love it. So let's move from the strategy to the tactics. I think you've got some great tangible takeaways for folks that we can touch on here, Doug. And how do you actually start generating names? What are some tools? What are some methods that you recommend for folks that are getting ready to go through this process or in the middle of it and maybe need to backtrack a little bit? I think you have some great things to share there.
Yeah. So part of it is one of the things, every word has these kind of associations. I always think like dropping a pebble in a pond and the ripples that come off of it. And so it's nice as part of this kind of alignment and removing subjectivity exercise, to map out some of those good signals you want. So you might say, oh, we want things about performance and impact and revenue, and we want something with intelligence. That's a signal. Now, we're not saying the word, but the signal, like insight or data or analytics, that kind of thing. We want something that implies orchestration because our software does that. So coordinating and synchronizing and stuff like that. So getting this map of words and the word associations that you think are positive help get people in the zones that are going to lead to your best names. And then, of course, you might want to do some, the opposite of some signals, words to avoid or be very, very careful with, So get those out early, one company might just say, look, we don't want the word funnel in it. So let's just rule out some of these words or some bad connotation things. So those are kind of these kind of mapping those association areas. And then it's starting to play with real words. And there's a really cool resource on a site called Onym, O-N-Y-M. Here, I had to spell it in when you heard it. Because I didn't follow my earlier advice. But it is actually a cool name. It's a side project. This guy's called Greg Leppert and Willem van Lanker. And they just did it as a side project to help people out. And it's just packed with all these really cool online dictionaries and thesauruses or thesauri and inspirational sources and word generators. Like there's one called Wordoid, which I love. I think they self-generated their own name. And you can just get in there and start playing with these things to bubble up words with associations you like. And this is a really good way to get in the frame of mind. And then sometimes I will also go with what I would call kind of combiner words. Like, let's say, you get a word and you want to combine it with something like path or labs. Like you might say, well, I like Zazoom, but I wanted Zazoom Labs. So there's another word that you can combine it with. Sometimes we'll list possible combiners like logic or track or engine, where almost any word in front of it will work with it and will give you the URL because it becomes unique when you put loop or stream or farm or factory after it. And, Zoom farm, Zoom path, Zoom. So these combiner words are really good to bring to the table as well. And then because .com, for instance, was a filter that we needed to have an available .com, and a lot of companies want that. So if that's the case, and you want a certain domain, that's the word doesn't need to be changed to own it. We always go to a domain marketplace where they'll show you names for sale. Either they're available and not taken, or they're at a premium, a couple grand up to 20 grand or more. And we use Sedo.com, SEDO, but there any domain marketplace that'll let you do a really good search using keywords. So you might put in your combiner like path and another word for your associations like bright and see what it generates, or you might just put in one keyword. And what you're going to get is a list of available .com phrases that are in or around that, pretty much generated by AI, And so right away, now your short list is all available names that you can buy tomorrow if you want them. In the old way, and I've done this before, you generate hundreds and hundreds of names that you like, then you go find out which ones are available. You put them in one at a time and find out that 98% of them die. And it's soul destroying. So I like starting in the domain marketplaces. It's like, look, if you need the .com, start with the world of available .coms and bring your criteria to that and your keywords.
I love that. There can be enough emotional angst in this process. Anything you can do to remove that and make it more efficient and just smoother from an emotional perspective, I think is going to set folks up for a win.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Doug, this has been very, very helpful for a lot of listeners. I think they're going to get a lot of value in the strategies that they can bring. I love the idea of thinking about these scales and helping your team members figure out how do they think about the name on these different frameworks. Some very useful tools in generating names like Onym. We'll link to that in the show notes in case you missed Doug's spelling of it. I thought that was a great tangent there, talking about a name as we're talking about generating names. But Doug, this has been great. If anybody listening to this would like to stay connected with you or follow up with you or learn more about your team at Velocity, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Well, we're on Twitter with Velocity Tweets, but I think coming to our website, velocitypartners.com. See, we had to use a combiner word back then, back in the day before we learned about good naming, and we didn't get the .com for just Velocity. So we're velocitypartners.com. Got a blog we work really hard on. It's kind of geeky and, like with things we're talking about, we like the weird little angles on marketing. And so there's a newsletter people can sign up for where they'll get alerted to some of the good stuff we put out. But that's probably the best place to find out some more.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved the call to action to sign up for your newsletter, by the way. Opt into our crap. That was just phenomenal. Made me chuckle.
Nothing if not honest. And when you do opt in, the message is even funnier. Actually, it's a bit of a parody of the bad marketing practices, I think.
I love it. I'm signing up after we log off here just so I can get a taste of that, because obviously it already made me chuckle. So, Doug, this has been great. Thank you again for being on the show, sir.
Thank you, Logan. Enjoyed it.
Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. You know, all those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking, showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept. Sweetfish Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency. You introduce the power of podcasting and Sweetfish services to your clients. Everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.